So last week was the season finale of one of my favorite shows, Canada's Worst Driver. And believe it or not, for the first time in quite a while, the show's actually left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. But let's start with something positive. To be fair, this bunch of bad drivers was probably the most self-aware cast they've ever had, in that nearly all of them acknowledged up front that they were terrible drivers. And as is often the case, the less awful drivers did have some decent skills, but were inhibited a lot by nerves, or in the case of Brad from Alberta, his very domineering wife and father-in-law. Then there was the first guy to leave, and more to the point, how he left. Also from Alberta was the self-proclaimed demigod on wheels named Scott, who boasted about driving 200 plus kilometers per hour on highways, weaving all over the road, tearing through city streets, including my hometowns, at God only knows what speed, driving drunk every day, you name it. And it gets better. He might or might not do this with his infant son in the back seat. Talk about a special kind of scum. Aside from all that, Scott has such a bad driving record that he impersonated a now ex-friend of his to get out of yet another drunk driving arrest, real classy, and can no longer afford his own insurance. In fact, that's how he got kicked off the show. The guy who nominated Scott covered him under his insurance, and is naturally really pissed off at this guy driving like a total lunatic on his name and dime. Since that made Scott an invalid driver, the show wasn't allowed to keep him. And believe it or not, this guy is still crying on Facebook that he doesn't understand why the show treated him like this, even though he not only admitted to committing felonies, but he claims that he purposely drove in such an extreme way to show off for the camera crew. But the part about him that is really pissing off the fans, which what this guy is saying a bunch, is that the show supposedly passed all this info on to the Calgary police, with the show's resident ex-cop warning Scott to expect a knock on his door. Yet as far as I know, that hasn't happened. This is dumbfounding. Discovery Canada has ironclad, videotaped proof that this psychopath is an insanely dangerous driver. His casting tape from Calgary will honestly age you by 10 years. And he even claims to have committed identity theft. But apparently this isn't enough to charge him? At least when I emailed the Calgary police to berate them over this, they claim to be keeping an eye on him, but your guess is as good as mine whether or not they really are. Or finally jailed him for something. Then there are the two non-expelled drivers who are pretty much neck and neck for the worst of this season. Lance and Dale, both from Ontario. Way to keep up that dubious tradition. Lance is a new driver from Ottawa who can actually drive fairly well when calm, except that happens about as often as Edward Cullen cracking a smile, in other words, almost never. Don't ask me why, but whenever he gets behind the wheel, he'll do one of the following: throw up, cry like a little girl, have anxiety attacks so severe that he's had to go to the hospital, or just have a total mental lock and crash into something. Dale, on the other hand, has been driving for decades and is the single most nominated person the show has ever had because she ignores every single sign on the road, treats the entire act of driving like it's a game, and hasn't clued into the fact that when she's had over 900 accidents, including crashing through her garage door because she was texting while driving, that might mean she's a pretty awful driver. When the show tested how well everyone knew road signs, she not only got almost all of them embarrassingly wrong, and claimed none of them exist in her hometown when I know for a fact that they do, but she had this totally bizarre answer for what she thought the tourist information sign meant.
Okay, you cannot make a U-turn on a highway. You can't. That's illegal. That's what that means.
What it is telling you that tourist information is ahead.
That's a tourist information sign? Obviously, this is a road, and you can't get there. So this is how you get to it. It probably goes on a service road, and there's your tourist information right there.
Simply put, these two have no business at all driving. Ever. Lance may in some ways be a more skilled driver, but he gets very defensive when the expert panel brings up his anxiety attacks and is in a ton of denial about how dangerous they are. That probably clinched the title for him. Dale supposedly failed less often, but she definitely failed more severely. Not only that, but after failing one particular challenge, she actually tried to run over the host. I'm dead serious. Why she wasn't immediately thrown off the show and arrested is anyone's guess, especially since I've asked this to both the show's producers and the police in the town where that season was taped, and no one has ever responded. And what a surprise, that's not the only way that the show has dodged that little issue of accountability. Because when Lance and Dale left the show, neither of them went to get any help for their problems, even though Dale in particular vowed to get extra lessons and get retested. So, as scary as this sounds, both of them are still on the road right now. Whatever you do, stay the hell away from Ottawa and St. Catharines. While I can't speak for the police in Ottawa, where Lance is at, I know that Niagara's police tend to look the other way a lot, so unfortunately Dale will probably have to kill or maim many people before they take her seriously. Yet another scary thing I have in common with Scott. Also, despite who knows how many emails from myself and others, the show has still not bothered to track down and interview whatever examiners and authorities decided that these train wrecks should have licenses in the first place. I've also emailed several transportation ministers across Canada about this, and the ones that bother to reply to me at all are in complete denial that there's even a problem. I'm guessing that they don't actually drive to and from work. And I find it galling that I personally was dragged through the mud trying to get my full G license, but with these idiots, it seems that all they had to do was turn the key and drive in a straight line for, 50, maybe 100 feet? And that's not how we're supposed to do things. And I really wish that Canada's Worst Driver, being as borderline high and mighty about driving as it is, would take this issue as seriously as they claim they are. That's it for me.